Ladies and gentlemen, this is the final rest of season rankings and trade show of the season. Before we get going, Faraz, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey all season long. I also want to thank the viewers, the listeners, the commenters, and the people that sent in questions as well. Again, you kind of asked for this show to be a part of our cycle in previous seasons. We brought it to you this season, and I feel like, Faraz, we kind of created a sense of community with people, who sent in their trade offers, but also the plenty, and I mean plenty, of positive and negative responses they got in the comments.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved it. I love the fact that as the season went on, I feel like we started to get some of the same people asking questions and some new people. Yep. And I agree, man. It does feel like a community, and we get those nice messages from everybody saying that, hey, like it's, so happy to be on the show again. I'm really glad to see the same people on the show again. So it's awesome to see. And I just want to say to you, like, I feel extremely thankful. Like listen, man, the Josh and Hayden universe you guys set the standard very, very high. And I really appreciate you guys having me. I appreciate the whole, underdog audience, bearing with me, through my good and bad, terrible takes, you know what I mean, throughout the season. So I really appreciate it a ton, man. I really do.
Yep. Predictions are difficult, especially about the future. So that's what we try to do here on a weekly basis. All right. Today, as you all know, we're going to go through about 7 names that have been in the headlines this week. I will add, pat ourselves on the back a little bit. I think we are ahead by a week or two on a number of the big storylines that have occurred in the fantasy football space this week. George Pickens, Trevion Henderson, all that stuff. But that means with the names we bring up today for us, we're going to try to be a week or two ahead on top of those. So let's kick things off with some names that were selected in the first round of your fantasy drafts all the way back in August or September, and start with Justin Jefferson, because expert consensus rankings have him as wide receiver 7 rest of season. Where are you at with J-Jeff, who, by the way, in JJ McCarthy starts this year, has scored as the wide receiver 17, wide receiver 39, wide receiver 19, wide receiver 48, and wide receiver 31. That's not great.
Not great, man. I have him outside my top 12. I have him at wide receiver 13 for the season, which is crazy to think about, right? Like, it's been very disappointing. And, we looked at him as someone who will simply be QB proof, right? Like, we were coming into the year willing to draft him super high, right? And we took him so early, just assuming that, he'll be the same Justin Jefferson with the same production, even though we had zero sample of him playing with JJ McCarthy, right? And then one bomb touchdown we saw in the preseason. I think was it Jordan Addison who caught that one, I think, right? Yep. So, maybe the lesson that we take from here is that, maybe with the first couple of picks in your draft, you consider all the changing variables, right? And if there's one glaring variable here, maybe we go with the other more seemingly stable options with less variables.
Faraz, I kind of get it from people's perspectives, though, of still shoving him into the middle of round 1, because we had seen Kevin O'Connell obviously work magic with Kirk Cousins and Sam Darnold. But even in spot starts in the past, we've seen it with Nick Mullins. We've seen it with Joshua Dobbs. I do think that there wasn't enough credence given to the fact that the Vikings spent all that Sam Darnold money on bringing in more interior offensive line pieces and also making the trade for Jordan Mason, that at their foundation, they probably did want to be a bit more balanced. So that would mean fewer, 40, 50 drop back games that we had seen in the past for KOC, no matter who his quarterback is. But overall, I agree with your point of, like, hey, Justin Jefferson, we thought was quarterback proof. And from a pure drawing of target standpoint, he has been. Like, his target share in the McCarthy starts, according to Rich Rebar, 35%, 29%, 39%, 29%, 28%. That's amazing. The issue is that JJ McCarthy just cannot accurately throw a football right now. And so off targets mean the targets don't really count. And he's just been frustrated. It makes sense. And unfortunately for us, over the next 2 weeks, I think people are going to see even more growing pains against the Green Bay Packers, which, by the way, the Vikings are projected for just 17.25 points this week against this Packers defense. And then the Seattle Seahawks, arguably 2 of the top 6 defenses across the league. It gets better after that, but that's why, like you, I have Justin Jefferson as a wide receiver 12 rest of season, way below that wide receiver 7 mark.
And McCarthy, he's only throwing the ball 28 times per game. Yep. He's only averaging 168 passing yards per game. You're just not going to get the type of outcome that you're looking for if you're looking for a rest of season fantasy wide receiver 1, right? And like you said, in those weeks with JJ, 12.3 fantasy points per game, 10 targets per game is great. But if like you said, like the catchable target rate, it's sitting at 60% over the past few weeks. So that's not amazing. Now, you mentioned the next couple matchups not being great, but playoffs,
After that,
Commanders, well, not even starting week 14, even Commanders, Cowboys, Giants, Lions.
Yep.
Maybe there's a chance. Maybe.
So to me, that is maybe there's a chance that Justin Jefferson, if JJ McCarthy is his quarterback next season, he escapes that round 2-3 turn conversation. Because I think if this team goes through the entire offseason, like doesn't bring in even Aaron Rodgers, which they were rumored to do last year, or make another move at quarterback, that's kind of where we're at, I think, in the 2026 Justin Jefferson conversation, which is stunning because each of the last 2-3 seasons, he has just been forced in the middle of round one, no matter what, arguably the best wide receiver in the league. And it made sense. And now we really do have to have some like environmental conversations. That's only if, like you said, the Vikings and namely JJ McCarthy do not improve against the Commanders, Cowboys, Giants, Lions. What do you think happens? Where do you think right now, final prediction from you, November 20th of 2025, if we're looking ahead to final week of August, where is Justin Jefferson being drafted?
202 maybe,
Okay.
Top of the second round, something like that. I'll think about it, man. I'll think about it. Look at I would be someone encouraged, and like a lot of people were drafting him where he was because of what Kevin O'Connell can do and the magic that he does, and I wouldn't discount the potential year. I guess it would be year 2 to year 3 at this point, but really a year 1 to year 2 jump, for JJ. So that's kind of what I'm looking at, and I wouldn't be surprised. Look at Daniel Jones, like that's the underrated one too, right? He was in the system, I think the Kevin O'Connell effect. We don't talk about it as much with Daniel Jones, but look at him this year too, right? He's absolutely balling. So could be a similar type of thing with JJ as well.
Let's talk about Bijan Robinson, because talk about systematic changes and environmental changes. He is going through a drastic one right now. Loses his quarterback in Michael Penix for the rest of the season, another ACL surgery for him on the opposite knee. And it's not just that, it's Drake London on top of it. So pie in the sky, big picture view on this. I think many people are just going to say, well, all they're going to do is, give Bijan Robinson 25 touches. And that might happen for Oz. But at the same time, you have to look at their projected point total this week on the road against the Saints. It's only at 18.5 points. So rest of way, consensus rankings still have him as running back 3 rest of season. Where do you have Bijan Robinson?
I'm not too far off. I'm at RB4. And okay. I totally understand the hesitancy, and I can totally get behind, moving him further, like below guys like Jahmyr Gibbs, below guys like James Cook. Like I totally understand that, and I wouldn't be mad at anybody for doing that. But for me, like I'm definitely a little bit worried about the Falcons offense as a whole, but I'm not really worried about these next 2 weeks. Like, yeah, the point total is low, but like you said, he's going to get a ton of volume against the Saints. He's going to get a ton of volume against the Jets. I think it gets a little dicey against Seattle for sure. He'll have to get it done in the receiving game against them. They do allow the most receptions, the most receiving yards to running backs. And then the Rams in week 17, I'm looking forward to that one. That's not ideal either. Now, in the games that Kirk Cousins started last year, he was 5th in expected fantasy points per game. He's actually being targeted. He was targeted more this year with Penix than he was with Kirk Cousins last year. But, I'd imagine that levels out a little bit. Who knows what's going on with Drake London, right? Like he's obviously out this week, but it's a PCL. Those are tricky. Who knows how much longer he'll be out for. But the quality of the offense is going to take a hit, right? Defenses might play closer to the line of scrimmage. I think bigger picture, I'm not overly concerned. He's still a playmaker. They're still going to rely on him a ton. I think the goal line issues are definitely there, but he still had 45% of the rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line this year. Yeah. Not ideal, but it's not terrible, right? Like he's still getting some of that. A-Chan is at 50%. Jonathan Taylor, believe it or not, despite all the touchdowns he's scoring, he's only at 64%. Daniel Jones is a little bit of a sneaky goal line quarterback there. Kyron Williams is only at 61% as well. So not ideal, but I think this isn't the end of the world for Bijan moving forward.
I'm slightly lower. I'm at running back 6. That's certainly a must start every single week and plug and play. I do have just, again, overall concerns about the offensive system, the players that are going to be at the most important spots. to get him into, inside the 20-yard line situations. And in fact, I think we can look at a long portion of the season, weeks 1 through weeks 10, because we know in week 11, he scored 2 rushing touchdowns. That was 2 of the 6 that he scored on the year. So prior to, again, week 11, he'd only scored 4 touchdowns. And I believe all of those were outside the 15-yard line. So it didn't even account for those short yardage touchdowns that you're talking about. In that span, weeks 1 through weeks 10, he was running back 6 in points per game. That's exactly where I am placing him. And that's keeping in mind that he was near the tops when it came to every single important, running back statistic out there, whether it be catching passes and receiving yards, whether it be forcing missed tackles or, just plain flat out rushing yards and rushing attempts on top of it. It just speaks to me how important touchdowns are to overall fantasy production, and especially being a top 2, 3, 4, 5 scorer at the position. So I think those opportunities, while certainly he's going to be fed over and over and over again. And if you look in the first half of last week's game against the Panthers, he was on an absolute heater. Some of the best running back tape I had seen all season long. But then what happened in the second half? That was Kirk Cousins. And then deeper in the game, that was when Drake London went out. So yeah, 4 of the final 6 games are on the road, and the 2 home games are against Seattle and the Rams. Some dicey opponents, and including Tampa Bay in there too. And he can spring a long run against Tampa, but if he doesn't, then that low success rate stuff, as we've seen with some of the blocking recently too, with the tight ends and Kyle Pitts and Charlie Warner, simply flat out has not been good enough.
So I guess it's safe to say you won't be trading for Bijan Robinson this week to help you win a fantasy championship. Okay.
No,
I got you.
Look, I think Bijan is, again, simply incredible. And I can be wrong on this. I'm going to take JT, CMC, Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, and yeah, I'm also going to take James Cook ahead of Bijan Robinson rest of season.
I don't blame you there. Listen, they're on better, there's roles or, on good offenses. James Cook is like, what offense he's on. He has Josh Allen still there. So I get that. But will he be fed every single week? Do we have to continue to rely on those touchdowns? Like that's, but we're at the end of the day, we're picking hairs here,
yes,
right? Like
100%. 100%. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about Ashton Jeanty, because this one has changed. I mean, he was a round 1, 2 turn player during the summer. In fact, there was one portion of the summer we did a video on this of who would you rather take, because they were going back to back, Ashton Jeanty or CMC. Luckily, we got that one right here on the channel. We might have to shut it down if we had said Ashton Jeanty for that one. Okay, he's running back 13 in consensus rankings rest of season. Faraz, that's a bit rich for me. I have him as running back 17.
I have him as RB 15, and as I say it, it's even like, oh man, is that too high?
Yeah.
Just after watching this game, against Dallas, like this offensive line is just terrible, man. Like dead last in yards before contact per attempt. You look at the line, you're like 6 carries for 7 yards. Like, excuse me, against the Cowboys. Like, are you kidding me? You have to use the receiving game at this point as the extension of the pass game, and they have 6 targets in each of the last 3 games since his bye week. Definitely a bit of a rough schedule coming up too. Like I'm looking at just you're gonna have him on your roster. It is what it is, but at least you have the Giants at home in week 17, right? So like if you can make it there, if you can make it to the last game, you should be okay. Now, his floor is going to stay high, hopefully, because of the receiving usage. But, he's kind of remaining in that RB2 territory. Like, I don't think he's going to, be that RB1. Now, he's capable of a top 5 finish. He's done it twice this year. One more than Saquon Barkley, by the way.
Yeah.
Fun fact, which is kind of funny. But, hopefully Saquon, I think Saquon, we talked about it last week with Saquon's rest of season schedule. Hopefully he can get a couple more of those under his belt.
I think you can make an argument that Ashton Jeanty has the most difficult running back schedule the rest of the season, behind also the worst offensive line in the NFL. Cleveland, Denver, Philly, Houston, in 4 of their final 6 games. That's rough. Now, sure, is that going to lead to some receiving work? 100%. And is he getting a lot more receiving work now than he got in the opening 4 weeks of the season? Yes, I don't know what the Raiders thought when they were playing Dylan Laube in those spots ahead of Ashton Jeanty. That just makes no sense. But again, that only does so much for me. He has to break off one of those in order to get a touchdown. Like, touchdowns matter so much, and they are going to be projected for so few points in those contests, along with it's so obvious who the ball is going to in the backfield, that I'm nervous about Ashton Jeanty. Now, you can say the same thing maybe about Quinshon Judkins, who actually will rank higher than Ashton Jeanty rest of season. But there are other names like in consensus rankings right after him. Chase Brown, Trevion Henderson. I will rank Chase Brown and Trevion Henderson ahead of Ashton Jeanty rest of season.
Yeah, especially Chase Brown. Like Chase Brown, his target share is going to be bonkers potentially the rest of the way. We'll see what happens with Samaje Perine's back. Hopefully that doesn't revert back to what they were doing before. I have a feeling that I don't think they will, but that's just a gut feel here. But no, I totally agree. Now, if you had an opportunity to trade him and your trade deadline is up this week potentially, I would look to do that. I would look to see like if I can get someone like Chase Brown, even with that potential risk of Samaje Perine coming back. I would just take that risk straight up. I think the floor is relatively, the same, so I'm totally fine with that. Now, Quinshon Judkins, I almost prefer to have that, that floor through receiving than I do in the running game, just because like we talk about the Raiders offensive line. Like low key, the Browns offensive line in the run game has been terrible as well. Totally. So just give me the checkdowns because Quinshon Judkins isn't really involved in the receiving game. So it's close for me there, But it's gonna be rough. I might look to move him if I can.
If you want to check out Faraz's rest of season rankings, you can do that over on Upper Hand Fantasy Instagram page. Also there, go and support Faraz. And if you want to support us here on this channel, go and play in the Dog app. I mean, we're in over 40 states right now on Underdog. 20 plus when it comes to prediction markets. 6 months ago, states like Florida, Georgia, California, Oregon, South Carolina, Virginia, all these places could not play an Underdog. Now you can use promo code The Show. Click the link in the description down below. And if you play $5 your first time, I will personally give you $100 in bonus cash out of the goodness of my heart. So go and play on the Dog app. I know it's that time of year. You just want to stay inside, do nothing on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But guess what? There's someone in your life that needs to get out, spread their wings, feel like they've accomplished something. And so if you don't have any ideas, what I'd love to do is pull up the SeatGeek app and see what's going on in my area. Like for me, Nate Bargatze is performing in a couple of days, or I can go see Gunna. 2 different types of people at those events, most likely. Also, someone named Bijan is playing tonight. Look, that's what SeatGeek is great for. Finding new talent out there that maybe becomes your favorite artist. Or if you're struggling for some type of holiday gift, like SeatGeek already has events up for, next year. I can look up something that's coming in April or July, or Alex Warren on June 26th. That's what SeatGeek is good for, getting you or your significant other up out of their seat and making life a bit more enjoyable. Of course, I have a promo code for all of you guys. You can use code FANTASY10 for 10% off your next set of tickets at SeatGeek. That's 10% off any tickets, whether you use it for the first time or not, the app before or not, with promo code FANTASY10. Make sure you click the link in the description to download the app and have the code automatically added to your account so you can use it later. Thank you, SeatGeek. Rookies rule the world right now for us. Let's talk about one. Tetairoa McMillan, 2 touchdown performance. Expert consensus rankings have him as wide receiver 18. Is that too high based on recency bias and what just happened? Where are you at with T-Mac rest of season?
I do think that's a little high. I have him at wide receiver 23. And I don't want to overreact from this game. And that consensus ranking seems to be a bit of an overreaction to me, because before last week, I don't think it would have been anywhere near that.
Agreed. I mean, after the quarterback threw for 120 yards prior to that, I would be stunned if ECR had him as wide receiver 18.
Exactly. And the thing is that, right? It's the blow up game that, Bryce Young had as well, like 45 pass attempts, right? Yep. 448 yards. Like he had one blow up game as well early on in the year when he threw the ball 55 times for 328 yards. And guess what? Like that was Tet McMillan's only other 100-yard game this season. Every other game under 200 passing yards. Bryce Young is averaging 148 yards per game. It's going to be hard for me to ignore these other games, man. Like we all know that McMillan is a straight up baller. Like he is a very good wide receiver, and like he doesn't look like a rookie out there at all. But this offensive environment outside of what could be 2 outlier games, I think it's a little rough, man, overall.
I'm with you. San Francisco, Rams, then a bye, then at New Orleans, which by the way was the 120 passing yard performance that Bryce Young had, and then Tampa Bay and Seattle. Like those next 5 games that they have is not easy. What I do love now, though, and what showcased against the Falcons game, and they tried to do it a couple of times before in the season, but it really was evident this past week, was that the Panthers feel that they can finally put him in a better spot in terms of finding matchups in the slot because their other wide receivers are healthy. They couldn't do that previously. They had to play him as an outside wide receiver because Xavier Legette wasn't healthy, or Jalen Coker wasn't healthy, or, those guys just weren't playing good football at this moment. You noted this, and so did Rich Rebar. When Bryce Young has thrown the ball 30 times or more in 3 games this season, in those games, T-Mac has 5 for 68 on 9 targets, 6 of 100 on 10 targets, and then obviously last week's 8 for 130 and 2. So in a bunch of these matchups, like on Monday Night Football, they might have to do that against the San Francisco 49ers. They might have to do that against the Rams like they did against the Cardinals in comeback mode in the second half, against Tampa Bay and Seattle and all these places. We're all in this, wide receiver 2 range in ranking him. I just don't believe that, to me, that is the identity that the Panthers want to have, that they still prefer to run the football and not turn the football over and all these types of things. So while I think Tetairoa McMillan is going to be a good fantasy asset, I do not believe, and maybe I'm wrong, I do not believe he is going to be the difference-making rookie fantasy wide receiver pick that some of the ones in the past have been for fantasy championships.
Or what Travis Hunter could have been. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. You just broke my heart, too.
I hear you. And I agree. I totally agree with what the Panthers want to do. Right now, if you look at the numbers, right, on a per dropback basis, Bryce Young hasn't been terrible. Like in terms of yardage, right? He just needs more of them to sustain. He just needs more of it to sustain high level production for McMillan. This team wants to be run first. They just couldn't run the ball these past 2 weeks. I think Young can be fine against San Francisco. They are allowing the 6th most passing yards to opposing quarterbacks.
They struggle to rush the passer, all that stuff. Yep.
But then they got the Rams. Yeah. And then they got to buy.
And Seattle and Tampa Bay with a whole bunch of different pressure looks. Like we will see. Bryce threw it down the field against Tampa previously. And just overall, Tetairoa McMillan has been freaking awesome. And I am so glad about it. We loved him coming out of the draft. The yards after the catch pops up nearly every single time he has one of these big games, I should say, because that's an underrated part of his, just skill tree. And the separation he creates on the outside, and it's just so clear that his mind meld with Bryce Young is so much better than Bryce Young's with everyone else. And I actually think that he will have better games when the other wide receivers have good games too, because as you said, that puts them into more scoring positions, that gives them longer drives, that puts them, just in better positions on top of it. So we need Jalen Coker and Xavier Legette to play well in order for, I think, Tetairoa McMillan to have a game like he just did last week as wide receiver 1.
Totally agree.
All right.
And Coker did have his highest route participation of the season. So it does seem like he is kind of ramping up a little bit and becoming more healthier. And I wouldn't be surprised, out of the slot, him being a little productive the rest of the way.
Let's skip down. I'm going to skip a name for you because we're going to talk about another rookie wide receiver here in Luther Burden. I think expert consensus rankings have his just flat out wrong at wide receiver 53. I'm higher up by a number of spots at wide receiver 38. And to me, on the surface, doesn't look like a huge involvement for him last week, but there were a number of things that did happen last week that Faraz makes me optimistic for rest of season Luther Burden here. They basically, moved on from Olamide Zaccheaus last week, just 13% of snaps. I understand Luther Burden only played 44% of snaps, but that was because the Bears used a ton of 2 tight end and 3 tight end looks in order to kind of combat the pressure looks that Brian Flores and this Vikings defense put out there on the field. So I think now, in this moment for us, is the lowest value that Luther Burden will be for the rest of the season. What do you think?
I 100% agree. As I was going through waivers this week, what I was telling everybody is that the fact that Luther Burden took over the slot role and you didn't even hear about it, he didn't have a big game, he didn't pop. It's just an opportunity for you to be able to grab him on waivers for as cheap as you did this week. And if you did not pick, if he's available on your waiver wire, I would highly suggest picking him up because I'm with you, man. I have him as my wide receiver 35 the rest of the way. as a top 36 wide receiver.
Ooh.
And some people are just like, wait, what? Like, I don't get it. And a lot of people still don't because they haven't seen the production. But he only ran 6 less routes than Rome Odunze this past week. 61% route participation. So yes, like the formations that the Bears decided to run is going to affect how much Luther Burden we're going to see. So while I'm absolutely stoked and very excited to have Burden in this slot role ahead of Olamide Zaccheaus, thank God, finally, if he does not take more of the perimeter routes from DJ Moore, he's going to have a Josh Downs problem, right? A Jaden Reed problem, where you have a potentially extremely talented receiver running out of the slot who simply isn't on the field for all the passing plays. Now, the targets per route run will be high, right? Just like it's always been for guys like Josh Downs and Jaden Reed, like it was in this game, right? 23% targets per route run, but the target share was down at 18%, which is great. So I don't want to sound like I'm complaining here, but sometimes, Josh, the road to success means you have to find better problems to solve. And I think that's the case here for Luther Burden.
Philosopher Faraz. I love that. I'll go on a limb and say, look, we still have just less than half the season to go. It would not be shocking by the end of the year if he is actually running as a second outside wide receiver over DJ Moore and opposite Rome Odunze. I believe that is in the future for him with the Chicago Bears. I can see with my eyeballs that, the Caleb Williams, DJ Moore connection just isn't there. DJ's not really separating on a bunch of these routes, or they're not in sync with a bunch of the stuff. And I believe that Luther Burden is not just this gadget slot player, and the floor is to replace Olamide Zaccheaus, and the ceiling is to be out there in 2 wide receiver sets at the exact same time, because there is a possibility, as you alluded to, that this team does want to be close to a base 12 personnel offense with both Cole Kmet and Colson Loveland out there, because you can do some really cool isolation things with Colson Loveland as a receiving threat and kind of detach him from the formation.
Yeah, I totally, and that is in the future. I just wish that he moved into 11 personnel a little bit earlier in the season so that he could potentially move into 12 personnel, at this point. But there's a whole lot of upside with him, man. If you look at the 123 wide receivers this year who ran 100 or more routes, Burden ranks 9th among them in yards per route run. And moving forward, he's going to be running a lot more routes.
Final concern here. The schedule sucks. So they get Pittsburgh this week. This should actually be one of their better matchups. Rest of the way for us, they play a gauntlet of some of the best defenses out there in Philly, Green Bay, Cleveland, and Green Bay again. So while right now, currently, the Bears are number 1 in the NFC North, there is that 4-game stretch. Like, they have to beat Pittsburgh this week, right? Then there's that 4-game stretch again. Philly, Green Bay, Cleveland, Green Bay again. That we're going to see if they can prove it. And I do think that Luther Burden, the trajectory of his rookie season has actually been quite positive versus, some of the conversation of who he was as a prospect entering his first season. He's going to be high on the list in terms of fantasy football Twitter's favorite players to talk about this summer for us, because of like the yards per route run and all those metrics, don't you think?
Oh, 100%, man. But listen, he was one of my favorite players to talk about last offseason.
Same. All right. We got 2 more wide receivers here. Let's talk about someone in the NFC North, Christian Watson. So since he returned from injury, and granted early on he wasn't a full-time player, wide receiver 30, wide receiver 48, wide receiver 46. But the reason why we are talking about him today is because he just produced a wide receiver 5 week. So rest of the season, expert consensus rankings have him as wide receiver 40. Are you close to that number?
No, I'm not. Well, I'm close to it, but like, I just have a feeling I have him at wide receiver 39 rest of the way. So yes, it's close, but like, I just have a feeling that expert consensus rankings has him, like, people think he's better than he's going to be. And I don't know why I feel like that, even though the ranking is super similar, but I guess it's just more so like me just being on Twitter for too long and just hearing people continually talk about Christian Watson. But like, to me, he's nothing more than a, boom bust flex play, right? Moving forward. Like, I loved the matchup coming into this week. Like, the Giants played, single high coverage at the 5th highest rate. And, they ended up playing at the 6th highest rate this past Sunday. And Watson 2.58 yards per route run against single high coming into the week, which was near the top of the league. You compare that to his 1.97 against two high. So it was a little bit of an obvious advantage for Watson coming in. So 23% target share, easily the highest of his season. And he was hovering around 12% in the games prior. But Romeo Doubs, way too many drops in this game. Like, it was just continually drop after drop, but 32% target share. Okay, so to me, I don't see Watson as someone you can necessarily rely on every week. He had a matchup, and he came through for you in a pinch. And against Minnesota this week, they run the most too high coverage in the NFL. So not really as excited. Detroit, Baltimore, maybe a little bit more exciting, but maybe not this week.
I'm a little more excited than you are. I do have him a couple spots, and actually one spot higher than Luther Burden at wide receiver 37. I understand he's yet to clear 5 targets over 4 games since he's returned. But that's just who he is. This passing game kind of is all or nothing at this point without Tucker Kraft. And they fire downfield shots more than anyone else, it feels like, across the league in the deeper portion of the intermediate field and then just totally down the field. I believe Christian Watson is vital to this team's success rest of the season. And it's a team that surely is going to make the playoffs and arguably up there in a lot of underlying metrics as one of the best offenses in the league. Because, again, they live in explosive plays, and he is their best explosive receiving threat on the roster right now. I understand he's dealing with a shoulder issue, but it really stood out to me, Faraz, that Matthew Golden dropped down to 39% of dropbacks last week. And that was wide receiver 4 on the team, even behind Dontavian Wicks. And we just really haven't seen it with Matthew Golden. That was a big whiff for us here on the channel this summer. I thought after, a first round draft capital, he'd be in there all the time. He'd be the one they don't move off of. It's been anything of the sort. So that could change moving forward. But if you look at many players in the first 10 weeks of their NFL careers among rookies at first round picks at wide receiver, Matthew Golden is not around many names that you want to be around at this point. So I think Watson has completely surpassed him. And while Dobbs can, other than the drops, be the consistent element here, I do think that Watson has a chance of a big play every week. It just comes down to if he makes the big play every week.
And that's exactly what it is, right? He just has to, we do have to rely on those big plays for sure. So, definitely a little bit more valuable, maybe in a half point, non-PPR type of league, might not have that floor that you're looking for every single week. And that's fine, right? But you're right, man. Like, it's amazing to see, especially after the Tucker Kraft injury, the fact that we're not seeing, Golden out there as much that tells you a lot, right? Of
Yes.
how the team is feeling about him right now.
Now, again, it's a shoulder issue, so maybe I'm just reading into it too much, but Christian Watson's coming back from a massive leg issue, and they haven't had any, issues playing him the vast majority of snaps. Speaking of injuries, let's talk about Ricky Pearsall and close this section out. So expert consensus rankings have him all the way up at wide receiver 29. I'm a big Ricky guy. Kyle Shanahan's a big Ricky guy. Said that prior to his injury, Ricky Pearsall was the wide receiver 1 we were hoping him to be and drafting in the first round. But I don't have him at wide receiver 29. I'm closer to wide receiver 32. What about you?
And I'm a little bit lower, wide receiver 34. I am, I'm a little cautious, just like how I was on Jameson Williams, right? Like, now I get it. Now I'm in, right? Like, but we just need to see it. I am excited though about this 49ers offense with Brock Purdy back. I'm a Brock Purdy guy. I'm a believer.
Same.
Right? And I think this offense is going to take a considerable step moving forward here. You got Kittle back. Juwan Jennings is healthy. And you have Pearsall now coming back. Now, before I move Pearsall up even further in my rankings, which I feel like I will end up doing, I need to see a little bit more. We have yet to see who the clear wide receiver 1 for the 49ers is. I think Pearsall is the better wide receiver than Juwan Jennings, like from a talent perspective, and profiles more as who I think should be the wide receiver 1 for this team. But we're at the mercy of Kyle Shanahan, right? If he decides that Kendrick Bourne should be the wide receiver 1, he will make that happen as he continues to be one of the, the best in the game at scheming wide receivers open. He did it for Jennings last year. And, Brock Purdy had a great rapport with Jennings. So we'll see. As of now, Jennings is the guy. 26% target share last week. And since week 7, 25% target share. So pretty consistent on a weekly basis. And, from that respect, we'll see if Shanahan wants to flip that switch to Pearsall. And if he does, I think Pearsall has the ability to be a top 15 wide receiver for fantasy. I really believe that he has that type of ceiling. And the fantasy playoffs looks pretty sweet too. Like if that switch ends up occurring, it's looking pretty good. But it's a big if.
So after Carolina this week on Monday Night Football, then they're Cleveland on the road, then a bye week. But as you said, 15, 16, 17, fantasy playoffs. It's Tennessee, then at Indianapolis, and then Chicago. So at least 2 of those, we should expect a lot of points for the 49ers. I'm not doubting the 49ers at all. I mean, if you're able to get into the playoffs or advance your best ball teams with 49ers on your roster, despite all the injuries that they've had, you're in a great, great, great spot, because this unit right now, to me, is firing on all cylinders. But what we have this year is just a small, small sample of plays that everyone has been on the field at the same time. I mean, just 32 routes with Jauan Jennings and George Kittle on the field. And on those routes, he's been targeted, Ricky Pearsall, just 12.5% of the time. That's slightly concerning to me, because as we have seen in the past, when it was Ayuk, Debo, Kittle, and CMC, they all can't get there at all times. It's only when one of those guys missed where they could. And so it is a bit more unpredictable and sometimes matchup based. Like, you remember Ayuk was the man beater and Debo was the zone beater. I think we can get a little bit of that this year with Jauan Jennings be the zone guy and Ricky Pearsall being the man coverage winner. But that just will make it a bit more of a fluctuation, unless they do go out there and, score 28, 29, 30, 32 points per contest, which is definitely possible. The main positive, though, for us is that coming back from this major injury, he did play 86% of dropbacks immediately, despite the box score not indicating that.
Yeah, and we've seen it earlier in a very small sample with Kendrick Bourne and Jauan Jennings, where Jauan Jennings returned and he was quote unquote healthy. He was running all the routes, running a ton of cardio, but Kendrick Bourne was the one who was getting like 7 for 110. You know what I mean? For like 2 weeks in a row, whatever it was. So this flip could switch, and I wouldn't be surprised if, out of nowhere, Ricky Pearsall, has 5 catches, for 85 yards. I wouldn't be.
All right, we'll close this final show with 2 final trade questions. The first one from your guy, Miguel.
How's it going, guys? Big fan of the show. Appreciate you answering the questions. Really quickly, I'm currently 7-3 in a 12-team full PPR league, 2 flexes. I just lost Drake London, but I traded him for George Pickens just before the Monday night game. Don't know how I pulled that off, but I did. And I'm struggling at tight end really badly. I'm currently starting Colston Loveland, and I'm wondering, should I make a trade? I'm thinking one of my receivers, maybe George Pickens or Emeka Egbuka, for Tyler Warren and Stefon Diggs.
So just to wrap this up, Faraz trading George Pickens or Emeka Egbuka and receiving Tyler Warren and Stefon Diggs. I guess my question is, who do you rank higher rest of season, Emeka Egbuka or George Pickens?
I do have Egbuka ranked a little bit higher than George Pickens this year, just because he's the wide receiver 1 there. Hey, Pickens looked like the wide receiver 1 on Monday night, but it was a big game for him. But yeah, I do have Egbuka ranked a little bit higher still, despite the struggle.
Okay, I think we're going to disagree then, because I have George Pickens ranked higher rest of season. So my question then is, would you trade George Pickens for Tyler Warren and Stefon Diggs in Miguel's spot? And then my question is, would I trade Egbuka for Tyler Warren and Stefon Diggs rest of season?
Listen, I would love to see Stefon Diggs continue this role that we just saw, right? Like primary slot receiver, season high route participation, but we've seen a spike before in week 4, right? He went all the way from 55% route participation to 82%, then went back down to 64%. And that's kind of the range he was in recently, 73%, then 78%, then 89%. Will it stick? That's my only concern. So if we knew that it was going to stick, right, I'd be inclined to take this trade. So if you take it, it's a little risky in my opinion, just because I feel like you're trading for a potential floor instead of ceiling here. He was the overall wide receiver 9 this week, but he was more of a wide receiver 3 before that. 14 receiving yards, 38 receiving yards, 46 receiving yards, little touchdown dependent before this past game. So as tempting as this might be to fill that tight end spot, I'm going to have to say,
yep, we disagree. I am trading Emeka Egbuka for Tyler Warren and Stefon Diggs. I understand that Tyler Warren's schedule is quite difficult rest of season. I mean, it's KC, Houston, Jacksonville, Seattle, San Francisco, Jacksonville rest of the year. Like the Colts are definitely going to be tested a lot more than they have so far this year. You can't say that, though, about the New England Patriots. They started with the easiest schedule in the league, and they're going to finish with the easiest schedule in the league. Cincinnati, Giants, bye week, then Buffalo, Baltimore, and the Jets to close it out. I think this Stefon Diggs, insertion in terms of being in the lineup all the time, at least 88% of dropbacks last week, I should say, and that was in the slot and the season high, is really important. That means that they can just put, Pop Douglas on the bench, which they did, and then run as their outside wide receivers, Mac Hollins or Kayshon Boutte, or a combination with Kyle Williams. And I believe that that's how they're going to roll. So I love Emeka Egbuka. I really appreciate the efficiency that he's had earlier on this season. I just think that I would rather stick with George Pickens and a combo of Tyler Warren and Stefon Diggs, because it wouldn't shock me at all if rest of season, like Stefon Diggs and Emeka Egbuka are somewhat close rest of way.
It wouldn't shock me either. I just don't know if Diggs is going to have that type of role. I kind of feel like what we saw this past week is close to what Stefon Diggs' ceiling is going to look like, opposed to closer to his floor. That's really my only concern with Diggs. I want to see that route participation stay up where it is.
It's only fitting we close this thing out with Joseph.
Hey, Faraz, this is Joseph. I am in a predicament. I'm 4-7. I really have to win out in order to make the playoffs. The guy is considering a trade where I send him A.J. Brown, Gadsden, and Breece Hall for Rashee Rice and Woody Marks. I have as running backs Chase Brown, DeAndre Swift, and Rico Dowdle. My other receiver is Jalen Waddle, so that would leave me with a pretty stacked offense. I also have Brock Bowers as my tight end.
Faraz, I love this question to close out because we've discussed numerous times the idea of consolidation, right? Getting some headache players off your roster in the hopes of improving them. And what, Joseph would be doing here, A.J. Brown, headache to deal with in fantasy football. Oronde Gadsden, awesome for a tight end, but he already has Brock Bowers, and a headache now because of this Chargers offensive line situation is really catching up with them. And then Breece Hall, headache because he's on the New York Jets. Would you make this deal or no?
I have to now. I mean, the way that you're describing this trade, I have no choice. But yeah, I would. Sign me up, dude. I mean, Rashee Rice had a down week this past week, but I'm really bullish on him rest of the season, right? Like this week coming up, like he can absolutely blow up against the Colts. They're giving up the 7th most fantasy points to slot receivers. They play a ton of, too high safety looks, and he absolutely eats against too high safety looks. So I think it's, easily time to buy if you can. Yeah, man, I'm in. We have 2 games now with Woody Marks too, as the goal line, as the workhorse guy. Like he had all the goal line snaps.
I mean, all the touches inside the 5-yard line. He's taken everything. Nick Chubb over the last couple of weeks.
All the 2-minute snaps, right? Like 86% of the rushing attempts this past week. Like that's an RB2 right there. So I am perfectly fine replacing Breece Hall with him as well.
Yeah. If any of these other names were a definite starter for you, I would say, hey, let's consider this and not do it. But sorry to put all my cards on the table, but I'm 100% making this move because that would, again, give you Chase Brown, DeAndre Swift, and Rico Dowdle as your 2 running back starters plus the flex. Then at wide receiver, your 2 wide receivers are Jalen Waddle and Rashee Rice, and then tight end at Brock Bowers, with then Woody Marks, who now is a lead back on the Texans, being your backup flex option here. I really like that rest of season. So hopefully, Joseph, this turned things around, and let us know down the road if you do end up making the playoffs and if you do end up doing this deal. All right. One last time out there. Thank you all for tuning in to this show all season long. We chopped and changed it and figured out, I think, a really good formula at the end. And even more importantly, 1, go support Faraz, Upper Hand Fantasy. The link is in the description down below. And 2, hats off to you, Faraz. Appreciate it, buddy.
I appreciate you guys. And this is a real honor to be on this show. So I appreciate it a ton. I appreciate the audience. Thanks a lot. And hopefully we'll be doing this again soon.
Yes. All right. We got ranking shows on Friday and Saturday this week, wide receivers, quarterbacks, and tight ends. So we'll see you all there.